Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We're very, very happy to have this webinar today. We're going to be talking about such important things about the transcendental times that we're living right now. I'm sure this is going to be an enlightening webinar from Joseph O'Connor, who's going to talk to us about what now in the coaching world and in the world in general. So I just want to remind you quickly, if you have any questions or comments, be sure to write them in the questions panel, or you can also share your comments or questions in the chat panel. There will be points where Joseph will be addressing your questions or comments. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you with Joseph O'Connor. Joseph, thank you for being with us today. How are you?
Hi, Alexis. Thanks. And hi, everybody. Good to be here. I just wanted to show you my face. I can assure you I'm not on some wonderful beach somewhere. This is a virtual background. I wish I was, but makes me feel good anyway. So I can use this video, and I will sometimes. Other times we'll go back to the slides, but I think you can see both at the moment. So just to introduce what I want to talk about here generally, we are in very difficult and very challenging times, absolutely. And anything here is not going to change that. It's, I guess, unprecedented in this situation, and makes for real difficulties for everybody in every domain, in the health domain, in the financial domain, in the business and economic domain, political domain, all of it. So then, this is my question then, what now? What are we going to do? Because action is the only answer to difficulty. And now is the only time we've got to take that action. So I want to explore a little bit around that in terms of what practices actually can we take up now, and what sort of mental models, in other words, ideas and beliefs, if you like, that we have that are not going to serve us well now, and which ones and which practices are going to serve us well now. And I like the idea of, comes from the book called Anti-Fragility by Nassim Taleb. You may be familiar with Nassim Taleb. He wrote the book Black Swan, quite a well-known book now in terms of the unthinkable happening and what to do about it, and particularly in terms of the financial crash 10 years or so ago. And anti-fragility is interesting because we are in stressful times, absolutely. Turmoil, stress, yes. Now, what is the possible responses to that? Well, if you are fragile, stress will break you. So we certainly don't want to be fragile. Now, what do we want to be? What's the opposite of fragile? Well, there's a lot of talk about resilience, of course, and this is important. Now, what happens if you stress something that is resilient? Well, it takes the stress up to a point, and then it breaks. So resilience is fine up to a point. But now supposing you take this idea of being anti-fragile, and anti-fragile is not about being resilient. It's actually about profiting or using that chaos and turmoil in order to change and grow stronger in many ways. So I was thinking of an example, and that would be water. You know, water is not resilient. Water flows, water changes, water is able to adapt to whatever stresses you put on it. It doesn't break. And I think this is a very nice metaphor for these times. Okay, I'm going to stop the video now because I want to get into some of these slides, and then towards the end, I'll start the video again, and I'll be very open to any questions that you have, either that you've thought of before or that come up during the course of the presentation. Okay. This first slide here, for those of you that have seen the film Lord of the Rings, you may recognize it. It's a famous pathway where the heroes are they first of all see the Black Riders, and the Black Riders, of course, are the villains. And they have to hide from the villains because they don't know these Black Riders. They're an unknown threat. They're terrifying. Nothing has prepared them for this threat. So they hide and they're afraid. And that's fine at that stage of the movie. And of course, if you know the whole movie, you know that a lot happens. They grow a lot stronger and they triumph in the end. And even though they are afraid at the time, there's a lot going on with other heroes in the story, finding out information and helping them. So I often think...
Sorry, Joseph, but have you switched your slides? Because it's still in the slides of the trees.
Yeah, we're still on the slides of the trees.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought you were, excuse me, sorry.
I'm still talking about the trees.
Okay, good.
Because it's about the film. But I want to develop this point. I want to say that if I'm in a difficult situation, then I kind of like to imagine that I'm in a film. And, you know, at the beginning, it's like danger and difficulty. And yeah, it is. And you have to do something. You have to engage in the story. But the story goes on. And one mental model I have is that, you know, the story goes on. And at the end of the story, it's okay. Maybe it's better than okay, but it's okay. So remember, in the story, however difficult it might get, the story hasn't finished, and we can make our own story. The other thing I want to emphasize is that practice, doing things, is really important in situations like this. There's a lot of advice, there's a lot of intellectual stuff, but that only engages one part of the brain, you know, the cognitive elements. And that's fine, it needs to make sense, it's okay. But if there isn't emotion involved, then you're not going to move, because at least in English, you know, emotion, motion, movement, you're not going to move, you're not going to do anything. So there needs to be some feeling engagement, because goals without values and emotion, they're just cognitive, they don't mean anything. So we want some practices here that will engage you so that you can do something. Okay, so then let's move on. Apart from practices, we want good mental models. We want good ideas that will help us to not only be okay during these times, but perhaps even be anti-fragile and use the challenge to grow stronger, as you do when you lift weights. You know, you stress the muscles and they get stronger. They don't get stronger if you don't stress them. So we've got to challenge mental models, and we've got to find good ones, including our own, of course, because as coaches we can't help others unless we're open ourselves to this sort of flexibility, this sort of anti-fragility. Okay, so I want to tell you a story then, to bring this home. It's a book in the forest. Imagine there's a book in the forest. You're watching a film, and there it is. And along comes an animal, and the animal sniffs the book, and it sees that it's kind of has some colours. It kind of smells funny, and it tastes awful. So the animal spits it out, off they go. They're not interested in the book. Fair enough. Now imagine that a woman from a tribe that lives in the forest comes along and discovers this object. And she picks it up, it's very curious. It opens and it closes, sort of soft and flexible. It's got squiggly marks in it. And she soon finds out that this book is really, really, really good for making fires. It's excellent for starting fires. And again, that's fine. Now imagine that a child has wandered into the forest from a nearby town. They're quite literate, they go to school, and they find the object. And of course, they immediately recognize it as a book, but they can't read, not very well. So they don't really know, but they know it's a book. And then along comes maybe the parent, contemporary adult, and she starts reading it, but throws it away because it's really very, very difficult to understand. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So then next along comes a physicist, and they open a book and they start reading, and they are very interested because this book seems to describe a really profound understanding of quantum physics. And then finally, the book is found by a woman who's both a physicist, so she knows about physics and quantum mechanics, and also has a very vibrant spiritual life, involved in contemplation, and she's very well developed in those areas. And then not only does she appreciate the brilliant quantum physics, but also there's some wonderful understandings about the nature of reality that are implicit in this book. And as well as that, of course, the limited ability of the words to grasp really fundamental reality, whatever that is, I don't know. Now, I like this story because the book stays the same. The book is always the book, right? And the other important thing is that every single person or animal that found that book was correct. It is good for lighting fires. It doesn't taste good at all. It is about quantum physics. But the point is that you can only get from the book what you bring to the book. You only get from whatever, in this metaphor, the book, but you can substitute whatever you like for that, whatever situation, what you bring. Now, that doesn't mean to say you can't learn and bring more to it, but we can miss things, not because we're stupid, but because we just don't see them, and we don't know that we don't know. Yeah, we just don't know. Now, we don't, of course, there are levels and levels and levels. We never know how far we can go. But I think what I like about this is that this story tells you that what you know and what you can know depends on who you are. So it's very important for us to develop ourselves as coaches, as people, as coaches. You might say even more in these difficult times. And perhaps these difficult times, because they are stressful, give us even more possible opportunities to develop ourselves, much more stressful opportunities, if you like. You know, it's like weightlifting. Suddenly you've got to lift this very heavy weight and you haven't done that before. So there are opportunities here, and it's important to develop ourselves, to look after ourselves. It's again, you know, the old metaphor of when you get on an aeroplane, something I haven't done for several weeks, certainly, and probably you guys haven't either. But you remember what they say in the safety briefing, in the unlikely event of the air supply failing, oxygen masks will drop from the ceiling. Make sure you put on your own oxygen mask before you help anybody else, because if you don't, you are liable to pass out, and then you're no use to anybody, and you're no use to yourself either. So I like to also say, look after yourself. Yes, of course, this doesn't mean to say you don't look after other people at all. Yes, it's really important. And the medical personnel who are doing such incredible work for others at the moment have my greatest admiration. And they need to look after themselves as well, because if they get ill, then they can't help the other people who are ill. Okay, so moving on. I like this slide in terms of coaching because I imagine this iceberg whereby the results you get, and this can go for corporations or for people, the results that you get are visible, of course, but a very small part of the total effort that you're going to be putting into it. So the results you get depend on your behavior, depend on what you do. You don't do anything, you don't get any results. And results and behavior are visible. Yeah? They can be seen by yourself and others. However, that behavior, which gets you the results, is driven by the bottom part of the iceberg that's invisible. And that's the emotions and the thinking that goes on. So, you know, as coaches, if an organization wants better results, then they need the people in them to change behaviors, and those people are not going to change behaviors unless their thinking and their emotions also change. But because these are invisible, it's not so easy to understand or to be able to influence. And a lot of organizations particularly think that they can grow their results by piling snow on top of the iceberg. And it just doesn't work. If you're going to increase the size of the iceberg, you've got to go to the bottom of it, and you've got to make it bigger all the way around. So again, emotions, thinking, mental models leading to action. This is what we want. This is what we want for ourselves. This is what we want for others. And at every time, as we set our goals, as we think, as we feel, as we express our values, we will set our goals. There will be things that we want, and a goal is something that you want. However, that doesn't necessarily mean to say that you're going to get that, because you may get a different outcome. So I'm going to use the word goal for something that is under your control. You think it through, and it's what you want. But the outcome, what you actually get, is not under your control, however much you may think it through. It's far too complex, depends on far too many other things and far too many other people to be completely under your control. And that's something I think that, well, I've certainly learned in the past few weeks, that as John Lennon said, life is what happens. Life is what happens to you when you're attending to something else. And I know that I had lots and lots of plans and goals several weeks ago, all of which have had to be changed because you just don't know what's going to happen. So what mental models then are going to be helpful, and what mental models are not going to be helpful in these sort of situations? Well, here's one I think that can be helpful, very helpful. And certainly in my experience as a coach, it's one of the most helpful ones that you could possibly have. And that's to do with our relationship with our goals. At least in English, we say I, subject, want, verb, whatever it is, my goal. More money, better relationship, new house, new job, whatever it might be, or just a cup of tea, doesn't matter. But we have a relationship with it. And sometimes we don't look at that relationship. We focus, of course, on us. Well, that's what I want, that's what's important, sure. And then we focus on the goal, and there's lots and lots of good stuff, smart goals and everything else that will focus your attention on the goal. But then we forget about, well, how am I relating to it? How am I actually thinking about it? That's going to be extremely important. So here's 3 ways that we can think about our goals, however well structured they may be by SMART or any other type of acronym. We can think about them in terms of acquisition, first of all, on the left. I want to acquire this. I want to achieve this. And that is, when you think about that, the structure there is about I here, okay, want to achieve that goal there. So the relationship opens up a gap between myself and the goal as if it's something that's almost pre-existing, almost formed completely in itself. And it's a matter of me reaching out and getting it, just like me reaching out and getting this cup of water and putting it back. The cup of water exists there. But goals, of course, aren't like that, however much you may try and structure them. So there's that relationship of acquisition, of wanting to achieve something, can separate you from what you want and lead to a lack of flexibility in terms of the process by which you go about getting it. Second relationship would be attraction. And this would come, if you remember that film The Secret that came several years ago, where the main idea was, well, don't try and get things, think in the right way, attract them towards you and they'll come. Well, of course, there's some merit in knowing that the way you think about things is going to affect how and whether you get them. But it's naive, I think, to assume that just because you want to attract something, it's going to come to you. Because that's more passive. Again, it sets you apart from the goal. There it is, sitting out over there, and somehow you have to attract it towards you. Like me trying to attract that cup of water towards me. And it's not going to work. I'm going to have to reach out and get it. So attraction has the same dynamic behind it. It separates you from the goal, puts a distance between you and the goal. It's just a matter of whether it comes to you or you go to it. Now, supposing you were to think about goals as a process of creation, not just a process of creation in terms of what you want, but a process of creation every step of the way, whereby everything you do is part of that creation of the outcome. This puts you as a creator rather than as a consumer. It puts you in a place of being at cause rather than at being at effect. And it means that as you go along, you can feel that you are on a path towards that goal. And then if you get it, fantastic, it's great. If you don't, well, okay, that's fine as well. There's no guarantees, as long as you have learned and developed from that creative process of the journey, because the journey is so important. I really like the metaphor of climbing Mount Everest. Your goal is to get to the top of Mount Everest. Now that's fine. How long will you spend at the top of Mount Everest? Well, 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes tops. And the last I saw, there was pictures of queues going to the top of Mount Everest. There is just so many people climbing it now. You have to join a queue for the last 100 meters or so. Okay, so yeah, you do it. You get to the top. Great, you've achieved the goal. You come down again. You'll be 20 minutes at the top. How long will you spend actually in the process of going there and in the process of coming down? Months. So you better learn something and enjoy and make sure that your values are expressed, the values that made you want to achieve that, in that journey, not just in the achievement, the final achievement of it. So this mental model of I am creating something of value here, and I am learning in the process. And okay, maybe the outcome will be the same as my goal, maybe it won't, but it will never be wasted. A couple of mental models that don't serve us well. First of all, one I call the if-then fallacy. The if-then fallacy works like this. when people say, if only my boss, my partner, my children, put in whoever you like there, would stop doing this, then everything would be fine. Then I'd be happy. Or equally, if only they would start doing something like this, then I'd be happy. Really doesn't work like that. You have no control whatsoever over what other people do, and your happiness does not depend on that. Equally, if I get this goal, whether, you know, new house, good relationship, lots of money, win the lottery, whatever it might be, if I get this, then I will be happy. That doesn't work like that either, because of the way our brains work. Our brains are never satisfied. Our brains are constantly learning, so that we always are making comparisons. And whatever you have, yes, okay, you have a goal to make it better and you get something better. That then becomes the norm, and then you look for something better again. In other words, however much you have and however much you think, if only I get this, then I'd be happy, you won't be, because there's always something else beyond that, because your brain is always making the comparison between what you have, which becomes normal, you get used to it, and what you want, because you want something better. And there's plenty of research on this, particularly around lottery winners. People who win the lottery, their happiness goes up. Sure, it makes you happy for a short time, that's okay. But then their happiness level goes all the way back to what it was before. And then, you know, you're looking for the next $1 million or whatever it is. There's also plenty of research that says that you certainly need a certain amount of money to be happy and to, you know, to live okay and to live well, but it doesn't increase your happiness very much going beyond that. So even making $1 million, you'll want a second million, and then you're only a millionaire, and then you want to be a billionaire, and then if you're a billionaire, what else do you want? There's always something. So might as well realize that our brains are not built to be able to say that when I get this, then I'll be happy, because it'll be very short-lived, if at all sometimes. Because there's plenty of things certainly that I've wanted and I've even got them and I thought they made me happy and they didn't. And there's plenty of things that I wanted and I thought they'd make me happy and I didn't get them, and afterwards I thought, thank God for that. That would have been a disaster. So that's one mental model I would present to you as not useful, certainly in these circumstances. And the other one is the fact that we have control. We don't have control. And the more we try to cling on to control, the more difficult it's going to be. So we don't have control. All we can do is the very best we can. Of course, we need to set goals. Of course, we need to try our very best and to take action to achieve what we want. Absolutely. But then you may or may not get it. If you get it, great. If you don't, equally, fine. Take action again. And I think the learning point here is that, particularly in these difficult times, it doesn't help to focus your attention on what's wrong, or even worse, what could go wrong but hasn't. But to focus your attention on what can I do right now? What is my next action step in order to move forward in the way that I want to move forward? Okay, so now I want to come on to this idea of practice, this idea of doing something. And I'm going to just briefly touch on 3 practices that I think are absolutely fundamental to our psychological, our spiritual, and our physical health. And now is the time when they become even more important. And now is, of course, the time when we may be tempted to drop them because, you know, there's lots of things going on. We don't know what to do. We may feel anxious. But this is the time when they're even more important. Now, spoiler alert here, this is not rocket science, okay? I'm not going to give you some amazingly complicated coaching model that you can apply and sort out your life. These are the basics. These are the simple things that form the basis of everything else. Just like as coaches, if you know the basics, the fundamentals, you will be a great coach. The masters of anything are the people who do the basic stuff. They really know it well, and they know it so well that you can't even notice how good they are. Okay, so here we go then. The 3 practices that I would highly recommend. First one, sleep. And there's a really easy one to do, right? No problem, usually. So sleep is amazing. Sleep is something that your brain really, really needs. Shift work, in other words, you know, working nights and sleeping in the day, has been defined as a health hazard by the World Health Organization. The sorts of experiments that they did many years ago, where they would keep people awake for hours on end in order to see how their brain reacted, are now unethical because they found out that they are really, really bad for you. So sleep is really important. First of all, if you don't get enough, things will go wrong. And I think that one of the really nice examples here comes from daylight saving time. Here in England, we have what's called daylight saving time. You may have it in your country as well, where it's at the end of March. So it was about 3 weeks ago. The clocks go forward by 1 hour. So basically you lose an hour of sleep is what happens in effect. And that happens, you know, to everyone. So the next day, it's really interesting to see some of the interesting statistics that happen. There is a spike in traffic accidents. There are far more traffic accidents the next day after you've lost an hour's sleep than there would be normally. There is a spike in suicides, and there is a spike in the severity of sentences that judges hand down in legal courts. It spikes immediately the day after, and then it goes down back to normal after about 3 days. And I think that's extremely interesting statistic. So I'll leave you to think about that. On the positive side, you need to sleep for your memory. You don't either learn things physically or mentally without sleep. It's somehow the brain needs to sort through things, probably in dreams, in order to correctly sequence them. We don't know how this works, but we know that it does. We need sleep for what's called neuroplasticity. In other words, the ability of the brain to learn and change itself, to change its wiring, which is learning, of course, because when we learn something, it changes the wiring in the brain. And that goes for whether we learn a physical skill, like playing the guitar or playing tennis, or a mental skill, or an idea, a mental model, a belief. The brain doesn't care what it is. If you repeat it, it starts to change the brain. And if you want to learn, then you need sleep. It's essential for brain health. I'm sure we've all had this experience as well. After a bad night's sleep, we're more reactive. We're more kind of on edge. We tend to snap at people more. We have less patience. We don't focus so well at all. And in fact, the part of our brain, the amygdala, that's involved in the threat and fear response particularly, and strong emotional responses is much more reactive, even when you're losing an hour or two of sleep. So it's a very big deal. And I would say get your 7 hours at least, because we need it, and we need it even more now. Okay, second one, exercise. Again, it's not rocket science, but there is just so much research that says exercise is good for you. Our brain is embodied. We have a healthy body, and then the brain's healthy. You know, we sometimes tend to split them apart, and we tend to think about all our cognitive skills, and we neglect our body. And you can't really do that, because the brain is part of the body. It's just a very specialized part of the body. So any type of exercise, any type of keeping active is going to help you, even a small amount. And there's plenty of research, even to the extent that exercise is just as good for people who are depressed as many drugs. In fact, very often better than many drugs. So stay active. That's the second one. Here's the third one, meditation. And when I say meditation, there's several aspects to this. You could think mindfulness. It's a short amount of time, doesn't matter how long, 10 minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, where you sit down and first of all, you relax. Yeah? You let whatever tensions fall away. And that's very important as well. And certainly when things are going badly, a kind of mini mindfulness of just half a minute or a minute, 5 breaths, 10 breaths can help to center you. But in terms of a practice, it clears the mind, for sure. It affects what's called a default network in the brain. So now the default network in the brain is those parts of the brain that are really quite active when you're not doing anything, because the brain is always active. There's always parts of the brain that are active. It's even more active when you're asleep. But the default network is that part of the brain that spins round when you're kind of daydreaming, when you're chilling out, when you're not thinking of anything in particular, but you are thinking of yourself. So it's really quite self-centered. So this is the daydreams, the fantasies, the sort of things that you would hope for. But it's very me-centered. There's no goal part involved, and there's no action involved. There's no parts of the brain that are involved in acting or in terms of setting goals that are involved in the default network. So that's running along. Now, what mindfulness meditation will do, it will affect the default network. It quietens it down. So it means that you're not so involved in that. So it strengthens basically your ability to focus. As a practice, it will strengthen your ability to focus. It will strengthen the connections between your prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain that's involved in all the cognitive and the higher aspects of executive planning and thinking, to the amygdala, because the amygdala will jump and be anxious at real threats and imagined threats. And connections with the PFC can help to quiet that. It's about emotional management, basically. So it helps emotional self-regulation, helps clear the mind, and it also, again, in these times when there are so many things happening and so many different things happening and so many possible things that could happen, especially bad things, that a mindfulness practice allows you to take a mental step back from that and just see it parading in front of you as a thought, because that's what it is. It's a thought. And what tends to happen, of course, and it happens to all of us, and it's difficult to stop, is that these thoughts will parade in front of us. We'll get caught by one, usually one that predicts a very bad future outcome. Oh my God, what's going to happen? This could happen. And our brain is extremely good at jumping into imagined futures. And unfortunately, it's just as good at jumping into imagined very bad futures as it is to jumping into imagined very good futures. And when you jump into an imagined very bad future, then what happens? Your amygdala wakes up, you start to feel anxious, and then that stops you thinking. So the ability just to see that as a thought, which is what it is, because nothing's happened, is very, very helpful. I like the saying that goes, if you sit on the station, you'll see a lot of trains of thought going past, but you don't have to jump on any of them. And meditation, mindfulness is about, sitting on the station and watching the trains go past. And some of them are nice, absolutely, worth thinking about later. Some of them are terrible. Definitely don't want to jump on those. And you just watch them, and that's fine. Instead of what will often happen is we're sitting on the station, along comes a train, we jump into it, and before we realize it, it's taken us a few miles down the line into a place that we really don't want to go. Okay, I've said enough, I think, at least for the moment, in terms of this presentation. So I'm very happy to take any questions that have come up in the chat, or any questions that come up now from anyone who's here. And Alexis can, I hope, do the honors by releasing the microphone there.
Yes.
Or reading some questions from the chat, if there are any.
Okay, so if you wish to ask your questions via microphone using your voice, you can just raise your hand, and we can enable you to speak. Or if you have any comments or questions you wish to write, you just use the chat box or the questions box, and you'll be able to do it there. Just give it a minute to see if anybody has any questions. Yes. Mario is saying hello. Hello, Mario. How are you?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. We've got more than 100 here from many, many countries.
Yes. Yes.
Really good.
And we have a hand. We're facing a huge economic challenge. Veronica says that we are facing a huge economic challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
True. Veronica asks, how can we help in coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Down to the most important question. And I just touch on a couple of things that I said here. First of all, take care of yourself, because unless you take care of yourself, you won't be the best coach you can be. And if you're not the best coach you can be, you'll be more limited in the amount of help and guidance that you can give to other people. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be, listen to your clients, and they will be anxious and afraid and upset and worried at these challenges. And maybe you can help them with some of the concepts here in terms of goal, your relationship to your goals. What do you want? The difference between goal and outcome. What do you want and what's actually going to happen? The fact that we have very limited control. And the fact that so much of the anxiety is imaginary, in the sense of we put ourselves in imagined futures, imagined very bad futures, and then we feel anxious about it. And when that happens, I would always come back to here I am right now. What is my next action step? What am I going to do here right now? What's important to me here right now that I can get on with? Because, going to these futures, yeah, anything can happen. We just don't know. We don't know how this story is coming out. All we can do is be a creator of our own story. And we're a creator of our own story by taking action. This is what coaching is about, isn't it? We can talk and talk and talk, but in the end, the client has to take action. And I think, you know, in this very simplest terms, that's what I would be doing. I'd be listening, of course. I would be reframing and challenging some of the thinking, perhaps, if the clients are getting anxious about things that haven't happened. And I would focus right down to, okay, what do you want? What's important to you right now? And now, what's our action step that's going to come out of this? And it's amazing. When people take action, a lot of anxiety goes because they feel powerful. That's the thing about anxiety. You know, we talk about being paralyzed with fear. We don't move. The moment you move, the moment you feel, yeah, I can do something, however small, you break free from that. So that would be my answer to that one. Any other questions there, Alexis? I think you can probably read them easier than me.
There are a couple more questions. I don't know if you have access to them, but I can read them for you. We have a comment from Alina. She says that it's very interesting to remember that in order to help others, we as coaches have to be efficient and we have to try to be well physically, mentally, and emotionally. She says she enjoyed a lot the analogies and the tips. Veronica says thanks. Ahmed says that a coach needs to take care of himself in order to deliver. Yes,
yep.
Exactly. And Giancarlo asks, how can we get the mindfulness for meditation?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but there are plenty of mindfulness kind of recordings that you can listen to. John Kabat-Zinn is the person to go to here. I mean, he was the guy. He's a American doctor actually, and over 30 years ago, he started what he called mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, I think it is, which was very much in the medical sphere of helping people in chronic pain and ill people to be able to cope much better. So that's where it started. It's not some kind of pie in the sky type thing. So there's plenty of material on that. John Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness-based stress reduction would be a start. It depends. There's lots and lots of other books and resources on mindfulness and meditation. In meditation, in terms of sitting still and observing your thoughts, is, you know, a practice that's been going on for 2,000 years or more. It's probably the oldest psychological practice of anything. So there's got to be something to it. So I would say, you know, research, find something that suits you and do it. That's the thing. If it doesn't suit you, don't do it, right? Find something that does, because there's plenty of ways to go about this. It's much better to find something that works for you than to kind of dutifully sit for 20 minutes fidgeting and looking at your watch and wondering how quickly is this going to end so I can go and do something else. So find something that works for you and do it.
Great. We have another question from Angelica. She says, how do you reconcile a 5-year plan with the present for a coachee that has lost his business?
That has lost his business?
Yes, that has lost his business.
I'm not. Okay, so there's a coachee that's lost their business.
I know, with a coachee that has lost his business.
Yeah, a coachee that's lost their business. So then that would be the first order to address. That coachee has lost their business. They are going to be in mourning for a start. They're going to be in grief. They're going to be sad. They're going to be angry. They're going to be upset and anxious. All of these emotions are going to come out. That's the first place, because you can't go to 5-year plans with that sort of turmoil going on. So really you need to deal with that first. You need to listen and listen and listen. And once the coachee has told you all about this, then maybe you can start to think about, okay, so there's that. Now, what right now, small action step can you start that's going to make you feel better right now? That would be the start. I wouldn't start with 5-year action plans. You want a small step that starts, and then out of that, once they feel better and more resourceful, then you can start thinking about, okay, well, now where do we go from here? What needs to happen now that you feel better and more able to focus? What needs to happen to start to get things back in order? And it's a big step, but one step at a
time. Giancarlo also asks, what would be the best coaching program for personal development, including family, profession, and job?
It's a rather big question. Oh my God, I don't know where to start. Best kind of implies that there's one that is the best, better than any others. I don't know. I think you need to what we're missing here is the client. Personal development, family, profession, job. Well, where would I start? I'd start with those 3 practices. You can't go wrong. You really can't go wrong with good sleep, good exercise, and mindfulness. It's going to affect everything you do. And there aren't so many practices that will affect every domain that there is. Emotional domain, economic domain, professional domain, health domain, physical domain, spiritual domain. It affects all of those domains. So it's like those of you that are familiar with the Wheel of Life. There are many different domains that we engage in, personal development, job, career, health, relationships, all of these. And it's fine to focus on one and to build one up. But if you want to really get the most for your money, you'll find a leverage point. And a leverage point is the action that you can take that will have the greatest amount of positive effect on the greatest number of areas. So what I would propose is that certainly those 3 practices, there's 1 or 2 more, but I would start with those 3. They're so basic. That is absolutely leverage points for all of those domains.
All right, then Aurora also asks if you can clarify a little bit more about the idea about the difference between goals and outcomes.
Sure, a goal is what you want. So everybody sets goals, of course. It's just natural. It's the way that we live. We can't help it. We will want something. It's fine. And these goals can be very trivial. They can be very short term. They can be medium term. They can be long term. They can involve all sorts of things. So we're always doing that. And there's plenty of tools, as I said, smart tools that will allow you to specify that goal as carefully and exactly as you can. And that's fine. So you have your goal, okay. But then where's the guarantee that you're actually going to get what you want? There isn't one. So I'm simply using the word outcome for what happens, what comes out of your action steps to try and get the goal that you want. Okay, it's maybe you don't get it, maybe you fail. Okay, and remember the old saying from NLP: "There's no failure, only feedback." But remember, if that's true, there's no success, only feedback. You can't have it one way and not the other. So it's like the basic point is what you get is not necessarily what you want. So in terms of what you want, you've got to be quite maybe anti-fragile, again, is the best way to put it. You've got to be able to take feedback, to change, to move, to flow in the creation as you move forward towards what you want. And that goal of what you want may need to flow and change as well. Or maybe you just crash and you don't get it. And well, that's it. That can happen too. But that's the basic point. What you want is not necessarily what you get. So make sure that you, in the process of moving from your present state to your desired state, that process is informed by values, and you enjoy that process, because you may not end up in exactly your desired state. You may end up somewhere else.
Excellent. We have a couple more questions. I know you just explained this question when I was asking you about how to reconcile a 5-year plan for a person who's lost his business. That question was repeated by several people. So it was, yes, more or less phrased in different ways. Some people have future plans that were interrupted. How can we help people stop looking after them?
Just let me address that. I mean, I understand that there are many people who have lost their work, sometimes totally, and I think in any coaching of that, like I said, you've got to listen. You've got to listen carefully there first. Secondly, there will be, no doubt, practical steps that they can take to either mitigate or to try to aim to create something else. And, as a coach, we absolutely do that. And thirdly, there's the sort of things that we were talking about here, in terms of, 3 practices that are going to help you, whether you've got a thriving business or whether you've just lost your business, and certain mental models that are going to make things a lot worse for you, if you dwell on them. So I think that, as coaches, we can do all of this. We listen carefully, we empathize, we are with that person. Secondly, we address and challenge, if necessary, any mental models that are making things worse for them, and we support and help any mental models that can help them. We give them practices that can help them as much as possible in general, and we help them in terms of making an action plan that will realistically and specifically address their very real concerns about economic and financial livelihood. But without a specific example, it's very difficult to say anything else besides those 3 things. But that would be what I would be thinking of. If anybody came to me as a client in that situation, those would be the 3 things that I would be doing in that order.
Right. A couple of people are asking about more examples or more explanation about the mental model, challenging the illusion of control, and examples of uncontrolled mental model.
Okay. The short answer is come along to the distance learning course on the neuroscience of beliefs, because this is where we deal with it in detail. about goals, outcomes, the way that the brain works in terms of our mental models with the neurotransmitter dopamine, how we learn, and how this means that we cannot be satisfied in those terms, and how it works as a mental model in terms of control or not to have control. Just as an example, it's, at least to me, it's really, really clear that we don't have control. the last couple of months has certainly showed me that however much I've carefully planned what I've been doing, things can happen that will totally upend it. And when that happens, it's no good clinging for me to cling to, oh no, now I can't do this training, you know. This backdrop here is a beach in Bali, Indonesia. And I was due to go there to do a training in end of March, beginning of April. And that didn't happen. So then, you know, I have to think, okay, right, well, that didn't happen. You know, that the outcome didn't match the goal. I certainly had the goal to go there, and that all seemed to be set up. Didn't happen. Okay, so what am I going to do now? How am I going to adjust to that? How am I going to adjust to the fact that that income from that trip and that training isn't going to happen? I'm going to have to do something else. I'm not in control. So again, I do the best I can in terms of adjusting to that and taking on other things, and always doing the best I can in the light of what I know, knowing that it's quite possible that things can change tomorrow and something else will happen, in which case I hope that I will be able to, again, adjust and do the best I can in the changed situation. And I'm not trying to set up an example here of how great I am. I'm sure that as we all did when these things happened, there were days when we were going, oh my God, what the hell is happening here? What can I do? Yes. And then that can pass. And then you think, okay, what will I do now, here? Because as I think it was Byron Katie said, don't argue with reality, you'll lose 100% of the time. You can't argue with it. You know, you can't argue with a virus. So there's reality. There's certain things that have happened. Okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to treat that? And that's it. Acceptance, somebody's mentioned acceptance here as well. Yeah, acceptance is important. Acceptance is not going, I'm just going to sit back and not do anything because I have no power at all. Acceptance is going, yeah, this has happened and I do have power and I am going to do the very best I can to change this situation in the way I want. But unless you accept the situation that's there, unless you really know your present state, how can you plot a way towards a desired state? If you don't know where you are, how can you make a goal? Yeah?
To finish, I think there's one more question and that's it. Nadia asks, and she says she would like to explore more about emotions such as fear, among others, and as well as neuroplasticity, body techniques and effects in the body and behavior. Is there any literature you recommend?
Yes, there is. Hold on, see if I can get it to show. Just a minute. Can't get it to show. Just a minute. Let me see if I can get this. Okay, I can't get it to show on this crazy background. But basically, Coaching the Brain by Joseph O'Connor and Andrea Larges, Practical Applications of Neuroscience to Coaching. Brilliant book. And specifically, in terms of values and emotions, the distance learning course, Neuroscience of Emotions and Values, part of Coaching the Brain, distance learning with an ICC certificate, will start on May the 20th. So interested in that, do drop me a line. But that's a very specific example. And for me, emotions are behind values, and values are what allows us to prioritize of the goals that we have, and therefore the behaviors and actions that we take, and therefore the results that we get. So I think we're kind of coming over time. So thank you all very much for your attention. I've enjoyed this very much. I hope you have. And I'm just going to move on the last couple of slides. A path with a heart. I love this quote from Carlos Castaneda. Are you on a path with a heart? Are there values and emotions on the path that you're going on? Because if there are, you'll be okay.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Joseph, and thank you to everyone who was with us today. I hope you have a great evening and a great afternoon wherever you are, and be well.
Be well, stay well.
Stay well. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.